Late at night, Jake was patrolling the dense forest near his secluded cabin. The moon cast an eerie glow on the trees, and the silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. As he trudged along the familiar path, he noticed a faint light flickering through the trees. Curiosity piqued, Jake pushed through the underbrush and stumbled upon a small smoking crater. In the center lay a metallic craft, half buried in the dirt. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, with sleek, iridescent surfaces that seemed to shift colors in the moonlight. The ground around the craft was scorched, and a trail of broken branches indicated it had crash-landed from above. Jake approached cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the smoke. The door of the craft hung ajar, revealing a dimly lit interior. He could see the outlines of strange, unfamiliar technology, panels with alien symbols, lights that blinked in rhythmic patterns. But what caught his attention was the small figure slumped against one of the panels. Inside the wreckage, he saw her, a tiny, unconscious alien girl with pale, silvery skin and large, luminescent eyes. Her delicate frame was adorned with a simple, form-fitting garment that shimmered in the dim light. Despite her otherworldly appearance, there was something undeniably vulnerable about her. "Oh my God," Jake whispered, feeling a surge of protective instinct. "What happened to you?" He glanced around, half expecting more aliens or some kind of rescue team, but the forest remained silent. It was clear she was alone. Kneeling beside her, Jake checked for signs of life. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and there were cuts and bruises on her skin. She needed help, and fast. Carefully, Jake lifted the fragile alien girl from the wreckage. She was light, almost weightless, and her skin felt cool to the touch. He wrapped her in his jacket, her small body shivering slightly, and hurried back to his cabin, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? How did she end up here? And more importantly, who had abandoned her? Once inside his cabin, Jake laid the alien girl on the couch, moving quickly to treat her injuries. He grabbed his first aid kit and began cleaning the cuts and bruises on her delicate skin. Her alien physiology was a mystery, but he hoped basic first aid would still help. The girl's breathing remained shallow, and she occasionally winced in pain. Jake's heart ached at the sight of her suffering. "You're safe now," he murmured softly, though he doubted she could understand him. "I'll take care of you." As he worked, he noticed her opening her eyes slightly, large and luminescent, filled with fear and pain. She tried to speak, but her words came out as a series of melodic sounds, completely foreign to Jake. "Shh, it's okay," he said gently, brushing a strand of silvery hair away from her face. "Don't try to talk, just rest." The girl seemed to understand his tone, if not his words. She relaxed slightly, her eyes closing again as exhaustion took over. Jake continued to clean and bandage her wounds, his hands steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. Hours passed, and as dawn broke, the girl finally fell into a deeper, more peaceful sleep. Jake sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath. He knew he couldn't keep her hidden forever. The crash had likely drawn attention, and it was only a matter of time before someone came looking for her. He decided to prepare. Gathering supplies, he fortified his cabin and kept a vigilant watch. He also began to study the alien craft, hoping to find clues about who she was and where she came from. The symbols and technology were beyond his understanding, but he documented everything meticulously. Days turned into a week, and gradually the girl began to recover. She woke more frequently, her eyes less clouded with pain. Communication was still a challenge. Jake tried to teach her basic words, pointing to objects and repeating their names. She caught on quickly, her intelligence evident in the way she mimicked his gestures and sounds. One afternoon, as they sat by the fireplace, Jake pointed to himself. "Jake," he said clearly. The girl looked at him, her eyes brightening. "Jake," she repeated, her voice soft and melodic. Jake smiled, nodding encouragingly. He pointed to her. "And you? What's your name?" She hesitated, then produced a series of sounds that Jake couldn't decipher. He decided to give her a name that suited her ethereal presence. "Lyra," he said, pointing to her. "Lyra," she echoed, a small smile forming on her lips. It was a start, and Jake felt a flicker of hope. Despite the language barrier and the looming threat of discovery, they had found a way to connect. He was determined to protect her, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Over the next few days, Jake faced the challenge of communicating with the alien girl, now named Lyra. She had picked up a few words quickly, but their conversations were still limited. Lyra's language consisted of melodic sounds and gestures, and while Jake couldn't understand her completely, they managed to establish a basic form of communication. One morning, Jake tried to explain the concept of breakfast. He pointed to the kitchen and said, "Food." Lyra tilted her head, watching him intently. He took an apple from the counter, held it up, and repeated, "Food." Lyra's eyes lit up in understanding. She reached out and touched the apple, then looked at Jake. "Food," she repeated, her voice musical and curious. Encouraged, Jake decided to expand their vocabulary. He pointed to himself and said, "Jake." Lyra mimicked the gesture and sound perfectly. Then he pointed to her. "Lyra." "Lyra," she repeated with a nod. They were getting somewhere. As days passed, Jake introduced more words and concepts, using gestures and objects around the cabin. He showed her how to use simple tools, explained the basics of human life, and even taught her a few simple phrases. Despite the language barrier, Lyra's quick learning and bright curiosity made every interaction rewarding. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jake decided to ask about her origins. He pointed to the sky and then to her, hoping she would understand. "Where are you from, Lyra?" Lyra's expression grew somber. She pointed to the sky and then made a series of gestures that Jake struggled to interpret. She mimed a crash and pointed to the forest, tears welling up in her eyes. Jake nodded, understanding the gist of her story. "You escaped," he said softly. "But from where?" Lyra's eyes filled with sorrow as she made a motion that resembled a breaking heart. "Family. Gone," she managed to say, her voice trembling. Jake's heart ached for her. He reached out and took her hand gently. "You're safe now, Lyra. I'll protect you." Jake knew he couldn't keep Lyra hidden forever. The crash had likely drawn attention, and it was only a matter of time before someone came looking for her. His fears were confirmed one afternoon when a group of men in black suits arrived at his doorstep, claiming to be from a government agency. "We're here to investigate reports of a crash," the leader said, flashing a badge. His stern expression and the intensity in his eyes made Jake's heart race. "Have you seen anything unusual?" Jake's mind raced. He had prepared for this moment, but the reality of it was nerve-wracking. "No, I haven't seen anything," he replied, trying to sound casual. "Just been minding my own business." The men exchanged glances, clearly not convinced. "Mind if we take a look around?" the leader asked, already stepping forward. Jake tensed, but he couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. "Go ahead," he said, stepping aside. The men searched the cabin thoroughly, opening cabinets, checking under furniture, and even peering into the attic. Jake's heart pounded with every step they took closer to Lyra's hiding spot. She was concealed in a hidden compartment in the floor, a place he had prepared just in case. After what felt like an eternity, the men returned to the living room, their expressions unreadable. "Thank you for your cooperation," the leader said, though his tone suggested he was far from satisfied. Jake nodded, maintaining his calm facade. "Anytime." The men left, and Jake waited until their vehicle disappeared down the road before he rushed to the hidden compartment. He opened it, and Lyra crawled out, her eyes wide with fear. "They're gone," Jake reassured her. "But they'll be back. We need to leave." Realizing the danger they were in, Jake decided they had to leave the cabin and find a safer place. He quickly packed a few essentials and loaded Lyra into his old truck. As they drove through the night, Lyra watched the passing scenery with wide eyes, her fear gradually giving way to curiosity. "We need to find a safe place for you," Jake said, glancing at her. "Somewhere they won't find us." They drove for hours, finally stopping at an abandoned cabin deep in the mountains. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "This is our new home," Jake told Lyra. "We'll be safe here." Lyra nodded, her trust in Jake unshaken despite the ordeal they had just gone through. As they settled into their new refuge, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The men in black were relentless, and they wouldn't give up easily. But for now, they had a moment of peace, and that was all they could hope for. Realizing the danger, Jake and Lyra knew they had to stay on the move. They spent their first few days in the new cabin preparing for a nomadic lifestyle. Jake taught Lyra how to pack light, what supplies they would need, and how to stay hidden. "We need to be ready to leave at a moment's notice," Jake explained, packing a small backpack with essentials. "Food, water, first aid, these are the things we can't live without." Lyra nodded, her understanding growing with each passing day. She helped pack and prepare, her quick mind absorbing every bit of information Jake shared. They traveled at night, moving from one secluded location to another, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. One evening, as they set up camp near a small hidden stream, Jake looked at Lyra and saw how much she had changed since he first found her. She was stronger, more resilient, and her fear had been replaced with determination. "You're doing great, Lyra," Jake said, handing her a canteen of water. "We'll get through this." Lyra smiled, her eyes reflecting gratitude and resolve. "Together," she said, one of the many words she had learned. As they continued their journey, Jake kept a close eye on their surroundings, always on the lookout for any sign of danger. He knew the men in black were still out there, searching for them, but he was determined to protect Lyra at all costs. In the isolation of their travels, Jake and Lyra began to bond deeply. Lyra's injuries had healed, and she grew stronger each day. Jake taught her not only English, but also survival skills, how to forage for food, how to build a fire, and how to navigate using the stars. One night, as they sat around a campfire, Jake decided it was time to share a bit of his past. "I used to be in the military," he began, poking at the fire with a stick. "I've seen a lot of things, been through a lot, but nothing like this." Lyra listened intently, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Military?" she repeated, testing the word. "Yes," Jake nodded. "I was a soldier, but after my service I wanted peace. That's why I moved out here, away from everything." Lyra seemed to understand. She pointed to herself and then to the sky. "Family? Gone," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. Jake's heart ached for her. He reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry, Lyra. You're not alone anymore. You have me." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "Jake, family." The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Jake admired Lyra's resilience and her quick learning. She was not just a survivor, she was thriving despite the challenges they faced. They communicated more effectively, their conversations becoming richer and more meaningful. One day, while foraging in the forest, Jake taught Lyra how to recognize edible plants. "This one's good to eat," he said, pointing to a cluster of wild berries. "But this one," he continued, pointing to another plant, "is poisonous. Remember the difference." Lyra nodded, repeating the information back to him. She was a fast learner, and Jake was proud of her progress. As they sat by the fire that evening, Lyra surprised Jake by starting a conversation. "Why, help me?" she asked, her English much improved. Jake looked at her, surprised by the question. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. "I couldn't just leave you there, you needed help." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Jake." "You're welcome, Lyra," he said, feeling a deep sense of connection and responsibility. "We're in this together." The days turned into weeks, and their bond grew even stronger. Jake and Lyra learned to trust each other completely, relying on one another for survival. Their journey was far from over, but they faced it with a united front, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. Despite their best efforts to remain hidden, the men in black finally tracked them down. Jake and Lyra were out foraging when they heard the unmistakable sound of helicopters overhead. Panic set in as they realized their location had been compromised. "We have to move now," Jake urged, pulling Lyra along. They ran through the forest, ducking and weaving to avoid detection. The sound of footsteps and barking dogs grew closer, echoing through the trees. Jake's military training kicked in as he led Lyra through a series of evasive maneuvers. He used his knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, guiding them through dense underbrush and across streams to mask their scent. Despite their efforts, the hunters were relentless, closing in with every passing moment. "We can't outrun them forever," Jake said, his breath ragged. We need a plan. Lyra nodded, her eyes wide with fear but determined. What? Do? Jake scanned the area, his mind racing. Let's split up. I'll lead them away, and you find a safe place to hide. We'll meet back here when it's safe. Lyra hesitated, her eyes pleading. Jake, careful. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. I'll be fine. Just stay hidden. With a final nod, they separated. Jake moved swiftly, making as much noise as possible to draw the hunter's attention. He set traps and doubled back, doing everything he could to throw them off Lyra's trail. The men in black were relentless, but Jake's determination to protect Lyra gave him strength. Meanwhile, Lyra found a hidden cave and took refuge. She listened to the distant sounds of the chase, her heart pounding with fear for Jake. She stayed hidden, her mind racing with thoughts of their bond and the promise they had made to stay together. Hours passed, and the forest grew quiet. Lyra emerged cautiously, hoping Jake had managed to escape. She made her way back to their designated meeting spot, her heart heavy with worry. Jake led the pursuers on a wild chase through the forest, using his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage. He set traps and doubled back, doing everything he could to throw them off Lyra's trail. The men in black were relentless, but Jake's determination to protect Lyra gave him strength. He crossed a river, hoping to lose the dogs, and doubled back along a rocky ridge, leaving misleading tracks. He could hear the shouts of the men and the barking of the dogs behind him, but he pressed on, using every trick he knew to stay ahead. As the chase continued, Jake found himself nearing a steep cliff. He had an idea. Carefully, he descended partway down the cliff, finding a narrow ledge to hide on. The men and their dogs reached the edge and paused, confused by the sudden disappearance of his trail. "Where did he go?" one of the men shouted, frustration evident in his voice. Jake held his breath, remaining perfectly still as the men spread out to search. He knew he had to stay hidden until they gave up and moved on. Minutes felt like hours as he clung to the ledge, his muscles aching from the strain. Finally, the men regrouped, their leader barking orders. "We've lost him for now. Spread out and keep looking. He can't be far." As the group dispersed, Jake carefully climbed back up the cliff. He had bought them some time, but he knew it wouldn't be long before they resumed their pursuit. He needed to get back to Lyra and make sure she was safe. As dawn broke, Jake made his way through the forest, calling out softly for Lyra. His heart leaped with joy when he heard a familiar voice. "Lyra, over here." She emerged from the trees, looking exhausted but unharmed. They embraced tightly, relieved to be together again. "They're still looking for us," Jake said. "We need to keep moving." Lyra nodded, her determination matching his. Together, Jake and Lyra continued their journey, always one step ahead of their pursuers. They found temporary refuge in a small town where they met a sympathetic mechanic named Sam. He offered to help them fix an old van so they could stay mobile. "Why are they after you?" Sam asked one evening as they worked on the van. Jake exchanged a glance with Lyra. "She's not from here. They're trying to capture her." Sam nodded, understanding. "Then we better make sure they don't." With Sam's help, the van was soon ready. Jake and Lyra hit the road again, but the men in black were closing in. The chase was far from over, but Jake was determined to protect Lyra no matter the cost. As dawn broke, Lyra wandered through the forest, calling out softly for Jake. Her heart leaped with joy when she heard a familiar voice. "Lyra, over here!" Jake emerged from the trees, looking exhausted but unharmed. They embraced tightly, relieved to be together again. "They're still looking for us," Jake said. "We need to keep moving." Lyra nodded, her determination matching his. Together, Jake and Lyra continued their journey, always one step ahead of their pursuers. They found temporary refuge in a small town, where they met a sympathetic mechanic named Sam. He offered to help them fix an old van so they could stay mobile. "Why are they after you?" Sam asked one evening as they worked on the van. Jake exchanged a glance with Lyra. "She's not from here. They're trying to capture her." Sam nodded, understanding. "Then we better make sure they don't." With Sam's help, the van was soon ready. Jake and Lyra hit the road again, but the men in black were closing in. The chase was far from over, but Jake was determined to protect Lyra, no matter the cost. Jake and Lyra continued their journey, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. They found temporary refuge in a small town, where they met a sympathetic mechanic named Sam. He offered to help them fix an old van so they could stay mobile and keep moving. "Why are they after you?" Sam asked one evening as they worked on the van. Jake exchanged a glance with Lyra. "She's not from here. They're trying to capture her." Sam nodded, understanding. "Then we better make sure they don't." With Sam's help, the van was soon ready. Jake and Lyra hit the road again, but the men in black were closing in. Their sense of urgency grew with each passing day. They knew they had to find a way to end the chase once and for all. One night, as they camped in a remote area, Jake and Lyra discussed their next move. "We can't keep running forever," Jake said, staring into the campfire. "We need to stop them." Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting the flames. "How?" Jake thought for a moment. "We need to find their headquarters. If we can take out their leader, maybe we can stop this." Lyra looked determined. "Together." The next morning, they set out to track down the men in black. Using the information they had gathered during their encounters, they pieced together a plan. They discovered that the men in black operated out of a heavily guarded facility hidden in the mountains. "This is it," Jake said as they approached. "Are you ready?" Lyra nodded, her resolve matching his. "Yes." They infiltrated the facility under the cover of darkness, using a combination of stealth and Lyra's powers to disable security. Jake's military training proved invaluable as they navigated the complex, avoiding patrols and surveillance cameras. Lyra's abilities allowed them to bypass electronic locks and disarm security systems. As they moved deeper into the facility, they encountered more resistance. The men in black were well prepared, but Jake and Lyra fought with determination and skill. They took down guards silently, moving swiftly and efficiently through the corridors. Finally, they reached the central control room where the leader of the men in black was coordinating the search for Lyra. The room was filled with monitors and advanced technology, all focused on tracking their every move. The leader, a tall, stern man with a commanding presence, turned to face them as they entered. "You think you can stop us?" he sneered, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're just prolonging the inevitable." Jake stepped forward, his voice steady and unwavering. "It's over. We're here to end this." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the room. "You have no idea what you're up against. We're just the beginning." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes glowing with determination. "No more." Just when they thought they were safe, the van was ambushed on a deserted highway. Tires screeched and bullets flew as Jake and Lyra dove for cover. The men in black surrounded them, weapons drawn. "You can't run forever," the leader sneered, stepping forward with a smug expression. "Hand over the girl." Jake stood protectively in front of Lyra. "You'll have to go through me first." A fierce firefight erupted. Jake fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Just when all seemed lost, Lyra stepped forward, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Lyra raised her hands, and a surge of energy erupted from her. The men in black were thrown back, their weapons disintegrating in their hands. Lyra's power was awe-inspiring, and Jake watched in amazement as she defended them with ease. The leader of the men in black staggered to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he shouted, backing away as Lyra advanced. Jake and Lyra pressed forward, determined to put an end to the threat. They fought their way through the remaining guards, making their way to the central control room where the leader had fled. The facility was in chaos, alarms blaring and lights flashing as Lyra's power disrupted the systems. Finally, they cornered the leader in the control room. He was frantically trying to access the computer systems, but Lyra's energy had short-circuited the controls. "It's over," Jake said, his voice firm. "You can't win." The leader turned to face them, a desperate look in his eyes. "You don't understand. We're trying to protect humanity from her kind." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "You hurt my family," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Jake looked at the leader, his expression hardening. "Whatever your reasons, it ends now." With a final surge of energy, Lyra disabled the facility systems and incapacitated the leader. The threat was finally neutralized. As they emerged into the dawn, Jake looked at Lyra with pride. You did it, we're free. Lyra smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. Thanks to you, Jake. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes glowing with an intense otherworldly light. The men in black were momentarily stunned, unsure of what was happening. Lyra raised her hands, and a surge of energy erupted from her. The ground trembled, and an invisible force swept through the area, disarming the men and throwing them back. Jake watched in awe as Lyra unleashed her power. The energy radiated from her like a protective shield, destroying the weapons aimed at them. The men in black scrambled to regain their footing, but Lyra's power was overwhelming. She moved with a grace and strength that was both beautiful and terrifying. The leader of the men in black, who had been so confident moments before, now looked panicked. He tried to reach for a device on his belt, but Lyra's energy knocked it out of his hand. He staggered back, his face twisted with rage and fear. "This isn't over," he shouted, backing away from Lyra's advancing form. Lyra's voice was calm but firm. "No more," she said, her eyes locking onto the leader. With a final burst of energy, she disabled the remaining systems in the facility, causing the lights to flicker and the alarms to cease. The facility was plunged into darkness, save for the glow of Lyra's power. Jake stepped forward, placing a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "It's over, Lyra. We did it." Lyra nodded, the light in her eyes dimming as she regained control. The leader and his men were incapacitated, their weapons destroyed, and their plans thwarted. The threat that had loomed over them for so long was finally neutralized. With newfound determination, Jake and Lyra set out to end the threat once and for all. They tracked the men in black to their headquarters, a heavily guarded facility hidden in the mountains. "This is it," Jake said as they approached the entrance. "Are you ready?" Lyra nodded, her resolve clear. "Yes." They infiltrated the facility, moving swiftly and silently. Jake used his military training to take down guards with precision, while Lyra used her powers to disable security systems and create distractions. They navigated the maze-like corridors, avoiding detection and making their way to the central control room. When they reached the control room, they found the leader frantically trying to regain control of the situation. The room was filled with monitors displaying various parts of the facility, but they were now dark and useless. The leader turned to face them, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "You think you've won? This is far from over." Jake stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's over. We're here to end this," the leader sneered, his eyes flicking to Lyra. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. We're trying to protect humanity from her kind." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You hurt my family," she said, her voice trembling but strong. Jake looked at the leader, his expression hardening. "Whatever your reasons, it ends now." With a final surge of energy, Lyra incapacitated the leader and shut down the remaining systems in the facility. The threat was finally neutralized, and the facility fell silent. As they emerged into the dawn, Jake looked at Lyra with pride. "You did it. We're free." Lyra smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. "Thanks to you, Jake." Together they walked into a new future, one filled with hope and the promise of a better life. The men in black had been defeated, and for the first time, they felt truly safe. Their journey had been long and arduous, but they had faced it together, and now they could finally look forward to a brighter tomorrow. The facility, once a symbol of fear and oppression, now lay in ruins behind them. Jake and Lyra knew that their journey wasn't over, but they were ready to face whatever challenges came next, together. As they descended the mountain, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating their path forward. Their bond had grown stronger through adversity, and they had emerged victorious against overwhelming odds. They had found a family in each other, and with that, a reason to keep fighting, no matter what the future held.